Welcome to this explainer. Today we're heading back to the misty, unpredictable highlands of 15th century Scotland. Specifically, we're zeroing in on a truly chilling event that went down in 1440 at Edinburgh Castle. We're talking about a grand feast, a teenage earl, and a betrayal so ruthless it'll make your blood run cold. Because, as we'll see, this wasn't just your standard run-of-the-mill political assassination. No, this was a total, unforgivable violation of the sacred laws of hospitality.
Okay, let's dive into this, because you might actually be wondering what inspired TV's most shocking betrayal. If you're a pop culture fan, you absolutely know about the infamous Red Wedding from Game of Thrones. But what's truly wild is that this terrifying, supposedly fictional scene, it was actually directly inspired by the very real-life historical event we're breaking down today. The betrayal we're about to explore was so cold-blooded, it literally provided the perfect blueprint for TV's most shocking moment.
Part 1. The Black Douglas Threat. To really wrap our heads around the stakes of this betrayal, we first have to understand the political landscape of Scotland in the 1400s and the massive power dynamics at play.
So the Clan Douglas, or as they were known historically, the Black Douglases, were incredibly formidable. They flew this heraldic shield with a bleeding heart and white stars, and they were, without a doubt, the single most powerful family in all of Scotland. They were celebrated as heroes from the wars against England, but here's what made them truly dangerous to the status quo. They controlled so much land and wealth that they could actually muster up a massive private army faster than the king himself. I mean, they were the ultimate overmighty subjects, literally wealthier and way more popular than the royal family.
This setup brilliantly illustrates the core conflict. On one side, we've got the head of Clan Douglas, William Douglas, the 6th Earl. He's just 16 years old, he's wealthy, he's arrogant, he's bursting with pride, and of course he's backed by that massive private army we just talked about. Then, on the other side, representing the Scottish crown, we have King James II, who, well, is only a 10-year-old boy. And because the king is just a kid, the real power on this side is tightly controlled by his guardians, Sir William Crichton and Sir Alexander Livingston. Now, to these older, scheming guardians, the Douglases weren't just annoying subjects, they were a massive, existential threat that desperately needed to be erased.
Crichton and Livingston, well, they faced a harsh reality here. They knew for a fact they could never defeat the Douglas army on an open battlefield. It just wasn't going to happen. If they wanted to take out the Black Douglas, they had to ruthlessly lure the young Earl into a highly controlled space where his own guards couldn't protect him. Basically, they needed a trap that looked exactly like a celebration.
Part 2. A Deadly Invitation. Let's look at exactly how this trap was set in the winter of 1440.
In November of 1440, Sir William Crichton sent out this incredibly glowing invitation to the young Earl Douglas and his younger brother, David. The parchment went on and on about friendship, reconciliation, and the joy of the two young boys coming to Edinburgh Castle to dine with the young king. But there was a very ominous, well-known rule among the Scottish clans at the time: never bring two leaders of a clan to the same place. This was the direct, urgent warning given to the 16-year-old Earl by his own veteran advisors. They knew the danger. But William, full of that youthful pride and convinced he was completely untouchable, he'd completely ignored them.
The trap unfolded pretty rapidly. After that glowing invitation was sent, the young brothers rode through the Scottish fog and arrived right at the massive gates of Edinburgh Castle. Just imagine that heavy iron portcullis slamming shut behind them, the trap springing shut, completely unnoticed. Inside, they were greeted with smiles, music, the whole shebang. For days, they experienced absolutely nothing but peaceful feasting, hunting, and playing. The lonely 10-year-old King James was genuinely thrilled to just have boys his own age to talk to. So the bait worked flawlessly. The Douglases completely lowered their guard, which brings us to the final night, November 24th.
Part 3. The Black Bull's Head. We've now reached the chilling climax of our explainer. Let's step right inside the Great Hall for the grand finale.
Picture this scene. It's a grand medieval feast on the night of November 24th. The young king and the Douglas brothers are sitting side by side at the high table. The mood is super light, the wine is flowing freely, and then, out of nowhere, the music just stopped. Crichton gave a silent signal to the servants, and the entire lively celebration came to a dead, terrifying halt.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the horrific significance of what happened next. Instead of bringing out, say, another round of wine or a final dessert course, the servants carried out a single silver platter and placed it dead in the center of the high table.
On it was the steaming, severed head of a black bull, its eyes totally glazed and dark. In Scottish tradition, this was the ultimate sign of the condemned. It was a terrifyingly clear message that a death sentence had just been passed on the guests at that table.
The 10-year-old King James? He instantly realized what this meant. He started screaming, crying, desperately grabbing Crichton's arm and begging him to spare his friends' lives. But his pleas were entirely ignored. Crichton just coldly brushed the Child King aside. And in that chaotic moment, armed men burst from behind the tapestries, violently grabbing the Douglas brothers right from their seats and dragging them away.
Part 4. Execution and Infamous Legacy. The feast was over. We now transition from the warmth of the Great Hall to the tragic aftermath out in the cold darkness of the castle courtyard. Out in that dark courtyard, kneeling in the dirt with their hands bound, the brothers faced a truly grim reality. They were officially accused of treason. However, when we look at the historical record impartially, they had committed no actual crime, other than, just being too powerful and posing a threat to the Guardians' total control. The trial was an absolute sham. Within minutes, a heavy broadsword was readied in the torchlight, and the execution was ordered.
But right before the execution was carried out, there was one heartbreaking final request. William Douglas, the 16-year-old Earl, asked his executioners for just one thing: that his younger brother David be executed first. Why? Simply so that young David wouldn't have to endure the agonizing trauma of watching his older brother die. It is such a deeply grim, protective request, and surprisingly, it was granted. Within minutes, the 6th Earl of Douglas and his brother were both dead. This brutal betrayal absolutely shocked Scotland to its core. In fact, it was immortalized in a famous rhyme from the era. Edinburgh Castle, town and tower, God grant thou sink for sin, and that even for the black dinner Earl Douglas got therein. That perfectly captures the immense public horror of the time. You really have to understand that even in a highly violent age like the 1400s, the murder of children who were under the protection of a peaceful dinner, that was viewed as an absolute unforgivable sin against the sacred laws of hospitality. Crichton and Livingston got exactly what they wanted. The power of the Black Douglases was broken, but they cemented a dark, bloody legacy of infamy that has lasted for well over 500 years.
So we'll end this explainer with a final provocative thought. Looking at the actions of the King's Guardians, was Crichton a necessary evil, acting ruthlessly to protect the vulnerable young king and the overall stability of the realm? Or was he simply a monster who went entirely too far? It's a fascinating historical dilemma to judge for yourself. But if there is one thing you should absolutely take away from this explainer, it's that throughout history, the most dangerous place to be often wasn't the battlefield, it was the dinner table of your enemies. Thanks so much for joining me on this deep dive into the Black Dinner.